In this video, I'll guide you through how to filter and clean your data files for your research project. So in this week's discussion board, you'll be asked to identify specific variables of interest that you can use to analyze or filter your data for your research project. To help you with this process, I have provided a data dictionary, the file that explains each of the variables in a data set. When you look at your Excel file, you'll notice in the top row, let me go ahead and go there, right here, there are labels, I'll highlight them in green, for each column of data. And so if we take a look at our data dictionary, those variable or label names will be here on the left. I provide a short description on what the variable means. Based on what I saw in the discussion board and some questions that came up, I provided some comments here to potentially guide you in how you might want to use a particular variable. This doesn't necessarily mean these are the only ways you can use the variables, but these are just some things I noticed and might be helpful. So if you have any questions on the comments or my suggestions, just let me know. Let's go ahead and look at the Excel file more closely. So some tips when you're looking at the file, it's helpful to take a look at what's available. I'm looking at the Montreal file, for instance, and so if I were to click on column A, down here in the bottom, you can actually see a count in the bottom right-hand corner, and it tells me I have 6,827 lines of content, and that does include my label. So really I've got 6,826 listings in this Montreal Airbnb data file. One thing you'll want to do is when you're in your data set, click on the Data tab and add a filter. And what this will do is it will let you filter and sort your information, because you may want to decide that you don't want to look at every listing in Montreal. You might just want to look at particular listings. Or if you don't even know what you're looking for, the filter lets you look at the data in a more organized way, so you don't have to look at every single line in the data set. So for instance, I'm in column I, and I'm interested in property type. So perhaps I only want to look at apartments in Montreal. So I would click on my drop down, and you can go ahead and expand this, and you can see these are all the data points for the column of property type. So this might actually give you some ideas on things that you're interested in focusing on for your city or region. Perhaps I am only interested in bed and breakfasts because I want to open up a bed and breakfast business, or perhaps only a house. So if I just click on house and I unclick everything else, and I hit OK, it's now going to only filter houses in my data set. And so if I click on the column I and I do my useful counting trick down here in the bottom right that Excel does for me, it tells me that there are 508 listings, well, minus one because my label's right there, 507 listings of houses. Now, if you wanted to narrow that even further, we might want to look at the room type. So if I click on my drop down here, when I'm only looking at homes, I can see that the room types are only the entire home, a private room, or a shared room option. And so I can filter it further. Let's say I only want to look at entire homes that are houses available for rent. If I hit OK, that will let me narrow it even further. Again, we're doing our little trick where we just click on a column and it lets us know how many data points we have. Down in the right corner says there's 245 cells with information, minus one, so I've got 244 listings that are houses, and the entire home is available for rent. To clear out my filters, I will click the clear filter, and then same here, clear filter. Note though that if you have multiple filters on there, you're only going to see data related to that. This is how you can look at data and see how you might want to narrow down by bed type, by how many accommodations that you want, If I scroll more to the right, perhaps you were interested in listings that have had a high number of rentals. So although our data set doesn't provide us the number of times a listing has been rented out, it does have the number of reviews. And so that will let us know how many people have stayed there and reviewed. So we could, for instance, filter this. And so again, because I don't want to have to look at every single line, by clicking on the drop down, I can just scroll through here and I can see that the lowest number of reviews for a particular listing is 1, and then the highest number, as you can see, I'm scrolling. The highest number of reviews for a particular listing is 217. This will give you an idea of which listings have had a high number of reviews, and in turn, number of stays, versus those that have had fewer reviews. One thing to note is that with the neighborhood, this does depend on how the host lists their neighborhood, and they might be quite specific in the area that their listing is located, or they could be quite high level and provide a broad neighborhood. So depending on your city, if you know the city pretty well and you take a look at the data that exists in the neighborhood column, they might make sense to you, and that'll help you narrow, like, oh, I only want to focus on certain neighborhoods. Or for those that are researching a city they are not experienced in, this is a good way to familiarize yourself with the kinds of neighborhoods that hosts are reporting for their listings. So I would recommend doing secondary research using Google to learn more about that city and how they name their neighborhoods. In Paris, they group their neighborhoods in something called an arrondissement, pardon my pronunciation. And so there's the first arrondissement, the 7th arrondissement, and so that might be one way for that location, that city or region, that neighborhoods are listed. So this does require a bit of research as you're going through and cleaning up. So all I've shown you so far is how to filter and sort your data so you can get a feel for what's in there. But what about cleaning our data? So for instance, if I only wanted to look at apartments and nothing else, one way to get rid of your data is to select all of the data values except for apartment. So I'm going to uncheck apartment and hit OK, and that will leave me with everything else. Then what I'll do is I will highlight all those and delete it. So when I highlight the cells, I will right click and delete. So that will remove anything that's not an apartment. And so that's one way to clean up or shorten your data set so that you're only looking at apartment data. You may also notice that in some of our columns, for instance, here we go to bathrooms, when I do my drop down, I can see that there are some cells that are blanks, meaning the host left that data point blank. So I'm curious what that looks like. So I've only chosen the blank cells. When I hit OK, I can see that these listings have no information when it comes to bathrooms. Now, if you're doing research on cleaning services, then these listings are not useful to you. So I would want to highlight and delete these rows to get rid of it because it's not helpful to me. And it will skew my data if, let's say, I'm focused on bathrooms, but then I want to also calculate the average price per stay per night. So you get to clean your data and organize it to what makes sense for you. Again, I'm going to, when I select all, it'll give me all my data back. And so one thing I recommend when you're cleaning and filtering your data is to save different versions. So perhaps as you're working on it, you'll delete listings that are missing bathroom data. But then the next day you decide that you're not doing cleaning services and it's not a big deal. So you still have the original file with all your data, or worst case, you can just go back into Canvas and download the original file that I provided for your city or region. But I like to save different versions of my data files with a very detailed title, so I know what I did with it. So it might be Montreal data file by bed type. Or I could say, if I was only using real beds for Montreal, and I cleaned up and removed anything that's not a real bed. So we can see there's air beds and couches and futons and pull-out sofas. And I don't want guests who are staying in places with those types of amenities. Then I would get rid of, delete those non-real bed options. And then when I save my file, I'll save it as real beds in Montreal. So if you've got questions regarding how to clean and organize your data, please let me know. Send me your file. I'm happy to show you. I can do more tutorials on specific areas. But the most important thing you should do before you even dive into cleaning is to take a look at the variables, what they mean, what might be of interest to you, and then you can go into the file, use the filter options to get a feel for what are the kinds of data points you have in your data file, because everyone's data file will be different. What you see in Paris will be different than what you see in Rome. So if you have any questions, just let me know.